As Unitarian Universalists, we believe truth is larger than any one book or way. Religion and science go hand in hand. Integrity requires freedom of conscience. Diversity is something to celebrate. In the struggle for justice, we come alive. Our highest aspiration and calling is love. Whoever you are, whomever you love, whatever path you are on, you are welcome here. Our chalice lighting words are from Dr. Andrew Usher. When you celebrate, celebrate well. But remember that nearby, someone is grieving. And when you grieve, grieve well. But remember that nearby, someone is celebrating. Therefore, as we gather here in this special place, we mark both grief and celebration. For absent friends and for those whose company we enjoy right now, we light this chalice. Once again, welcome to West Shore Unitarian Universalist Church. We're so glad that you're here this morning, and we are so glad about the folks joining us from home. Welcome to you also. We have so much that's good going on. Check out the West Shore Weekly in your order of service about events coming up and how you can get involved. We also invite you to join us after the service in the chapel at noon for today's sermon chat. So we're excited to welcome our guest speaker this morning. Reverend Shirley A. Nelson is an interspiritual, interfaith minister and compassionate counselor located in Lakewood, Ohio. Shirley has been facilitating one-on-one counseling sessions and leading sacred circles with the focus on self-exploration for more than 20 years. She's the founder of Sands Sacred Circle, a grassroots, community-oriented program to inspire personal growth and well-being for self and others. She's also a writer, grief tender, lover of poetry, nature, dancing, singing, reading, art, music, chocolate, and labyrinth walking. Let's now greet each other warmly. Look for someone you don't know and say hi. You can say hi to folks you do know during coffee hour. The greeting time will end with the sounding of the bowl. The offering will now be given and gratefully received. When you celebrate, celebrate well. But remember that nearby someone is grieving. And when you grieve, grieve well. But remember that nearby someone is celebrating. So today, am I grieving or am I celebrating? When I wear the mask that I wear in public, you may not be able to tell. So I'll share with you that today, like most days, both are true for me. Even in my happiest moments, grief is just below the surface. From the time I was young, loss has been a thread woven through the story of my life. And even if we've never met, I suspect that may be true for you as well. It takes courage to keep an open heart when we experience so many unfilled expectations, so many limitations of pain and physical illness, and so many heartbreaking goodbyes. I don't speak easily about these losses, but that's okay. My resistance to speak gives me compassion for what you may also leave unspoken. So let's be kind to each other in this place where we so easily celebrate well together, and open our hearts to talk about some difficult things this morning so we can also grieve well together.
And now, all are welcome to come forward to share from the heart in our ritual of For All That Is Our Lives. Please come, for those who are able.
These are the joys and sorrows of our hearts, which in Reverend McCarr's absence will be shared with Kathy Strauser, head of our pastoral care team, and held with care until Reverend McCarr's return.
Good morning, West Shore. So good to see you this morning. Today, my sermon is going to be about grief, loss, and amazing grace. And one of the things that Carol said in her reflection is that grief is always underneath the surface of things, no matter what mask we're wearing. Which is why sometimes when you're watching a movie and the tears start bubbling up, you're feeling that grief that's already within you. Grief and loss touch all of us, arriving at our door in many ways. It comes swirling on the winds of divorce, the death of someone dear, or as an illness that alters the course of a life. The paralyzing thickness of sorrow can come as a thief in the night. It feels like a door that is unhinged and an unrelenting river of tears. We have very little space for grief because we don't trust where it's going to take us, and because fear is a major obstacle. Grief and loss are as much a part of the cycle of life as birth. By naming our losses, instead of shoving them to the back shelves of our lives, we normalize the experience, which helps us find a healthy path back to well-being. Some of you may be here today and you are grieving a recent loss or something from the past. For those who are grieving, I offer you these words written by author Jamie Anderson. Grief, I've learned, is really just love. It's all the love you want to give but cannot. All of that unspent love gathers up in the corners of your eyes, the lump in your throat, and in that hollow part of your chest. Grief is just love with no place to go. My sermon today, exploring the many layers of grief, was inspired by the book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow, Rituals of Renewal and the Sacred Work of Grief by Francis Weller. I offer this guide to help you to follow in the different gates of grief that I name. In his book, Weller describes the 5 gates of grief that contain the mystery of loss and sorrow. I will name the 5 gates and the medicine that each one offers. Now, I just want you to know, this is not medicine from the drugstore, okay? This is soul medicine. This is something that you already have inside of you. It is an energetic healing that helps to restore you. And each gate carries a specific medicine. So what you will learn is that most of us are impacted by all 5 gates at some point in time. However, due to my own personal journey, I'm going to focus primarily on gate number 2 and gate number 5. So everyone, if you've been here long enough, will experience gate number 1. And gate number 1 is everything we love, we will lose. Nothing is permanent. Not only does it encompass loss of key relationships, but it also refers to loss of health, loss of community, loss of identity, loss of security, and death, our own entry into the great mystery. Losing a loved one is often accompanied by losing your identity and leaves you with the question of, who am I now? How do I begin to pick up the pieces? And I imagine that many of you know that feeling and may still be grappling with the answer to those questions. Because it is such a tender time in our lives, gate number 1 offers the medicine of vulnerability, which comes from the Latin word for wound. It is a time to nurture yourself and to allow spaciousness. And in this tender place, your wounded heart leads you gently through the process of healing. No need to rush. No matter what anyone else says, there's no need to rush. Gate number 2. Some of you may experience a little bit turbulence here. Gate number 2 is rather insidious. And it's kind of hard to detect because it's really making note of those feelings inside of us, the emotions that lie underneath the surface. Some aspects of gate number 2 are not so easily identified because in it there are parts of ourselves that are hidden, that are often referred to as outcast. I was looking for Charlie Brown. Did Charlie Brown come up? There he is. Okay. So these are the places that have not known love, such as the things we perceive as defective about ourselves, the parts of ourselves that we banish to the furthest corners of our lives. The outcast parts have lived outside of kindness, compassion, warmth, or welcome, and they are extremely tender places inside of us. Gate number 2 holds the places within us that have been wrapped in shame, neglected pieces of soul that live in utter despair. We often hate these parts of ourselves, hold them in contempt, and refuse to allow them the light of day. Now, this is something that I know I'm not going to get an amen on, but if y'all got an amen, I'll take it. Gate number 2 is one of the hardest aspects of grief to identify because it's coming from inside of us. And often it is assumed to be depression. That's interesting. Depression, when it's really a struggle to maintain some sense of worth. I'm just going to say that again. Often it is assumed to be depression when it's really a struggle to maintain some sense of worth. If one of the thoughts you consistently hold about yourself is, I am not enough, you are dealing with gate number 2. How often have you said that, and how does it make you feel? It makes you feel like you're not good enough. Whenever we cast out parts of ourselves, it is a loss. But there is hope. There is hope. We can forgive our judgments and affirm our worth by simply saying, I am enough, whether you believe it or not. Can I hear you all just say, I am enough? Okay, and just say it as many times as you have to. So last year, I found myself struggling with grief that was related to issues, but I didn't realize what it was. It was some of those issues around shame and blame, not good enough. And one day I found myself weeping off and on throughout the day for several weeks. But I couldn't put my finger on why I was feeling such sorrow. I felt like a leaky faucet. So my weeping started somewhere around March, and it was right after I had finished reading The Wild Edge of Sorrow, Francis Weller's book. It went on for several weeks. I couldn't put my finger on it. I kept asking myself, what am I crying about? What is it that's causing this to happen? And it would happen just any place, in the grocery store, at home, in church. I had not had any recent losses. The most recent loss had been my mom in 2020. And then I had some relatives that had passed away, also during COVID. But when I think of those deaths, I didn't feel like that's what I was crying about. So I just kept asking myself, what is this about? And all I kept seeing was this job that I had been let go of 14 years ago. And I said to myself, surely I couldn't be crying about a job that was over 14 years ago. So I took it to my spiritual director and told her what was happening. And she said, you know, if there are a couple of people that you used to work with that you're still in touch with, why don't you talk to them? Tell them what you're feeling. And I'm thinking, I don't know how that's going to help. But I did it. I was obedient. So I went to my friends, Ima Jean and Daniel, people that I'm still in touch with today. They're both ministers and counselors. I explained my pain. I explained to them mostly of how bad I felt when I left that job, or in other words, when that job let me go. I don't like to say those words, but when I was rifted. But I explained to them how bad I felt, how I had never talked to anybody about how painful it was. And I told them how, in leaving the job, I really had left a family because my colleagues had become my family. And I worked long hours. I worked that job 50, 60 hours a week. We were together all the time. And I loved the work. I loved the perks. I loved my colleagues. And getting downsized was unexpected, so it caught me extremely off guard. It was debilitating. I really couldn't function. I think it's one of those times when you have a nervous breakdown of sorts, but you got to keep on moving, and I had to keep on moving. I felt bereft, loss of identity, unable to pull myself up. I was full of despair, shame, and blame. Over the years, I kept rehashing what I shoulda, woulda, coulda done. So after talking to Daniel, he said, "It seems like you have forgiven the situation and all the players that you believe were involved, but I don't think you have forgiven yourself." And as soon as he said it, I knew that was it. I had not forgiven myself. I had been beating myself up for the past 14 years, not knowingly, but something that we do sometimes. So the book helped me to realize that what was happening was based on what I had learned about in gate number 2, the places within us that have been wrapped in shame and that required love and self-compassion. My process of forgiveness involved journaling, and because I like to write poetry, I wrote a number of poems. And the poems were based on shame. I went as far back as I could remember when I first began to feel shame. And that went back to the early 1970s. So I did a series of poems based on the mask that I wore from then until almost now. The process was cathartic. It was like the weight of the world was lifted from my shoulders. I felt I had released something tremendous, and because it has felt so healing, I am truly convinced that that was the culprit. I had to forgive myself. So gate number 2 offers the medicine of compassion. When we discard parts of ourselves due to shame and an inability to accept ourselves completely, self-compassion is the energetic healing required to learn to love ourselves. Next is gate number 3. Okay, Charlie Brown can go. Gate number 3 contains the sorrows of the world. It is grief based on suffering in the world. Our hearts and minds are burdened with wars and rumors of wars and all kinds of isms, schisms, phobias, and injustices, such as sexism, ableism, ageism, homophobia and transphobia, systemic racism, and social injustices, and on and on and on. Gate number 3 offers the medicine of sacred entanglement. This is a time for you to get involved and take action. As the late great Congressman John Lewis said, this is a time to get into some good trouble. How many of you watch David Murr, Channel 5? Okay. Do you find yourself wondering if there's anything you can do when you watch David Muir on Channel 5 speed through the troubles of the world in his evening news broadcast? If that's you, see me after the service. See me after the service to find out how you can get involved with the social justice team or the Undoing Oppressions team here at West Shore. We have things for you to do. You don't have to suffer. Gate number 4, what we expected and did not receive. It is grief that we carry due to our diminished experience of who we truly are. At the core of this grief is our longing to belong. The emptiness is an overpowering absence of things that did not materialize. Within this gate lies our diminished experience of who we are. Gate number 4 carries the medicine of belonging. We affirm our worth and dignity by being true to our natures so that our gifts can emerge. By simply being who we are, we take our place in the community. Just be who you are. So hang in there with me. I'm moving on now to gate number 5. And as I indicated, gate number 2 and gate number 5, those are my personal challenges. So gate number 5 is our ancestral grief. It is the grief we carry in our bodies from sorrows experienced by our ancestors. Ancestral grief is all of the sorrow that is not ours and which lives in and through us. It is felt by those who have been betrayed, abducted, enslaved, massacred, or oppressed. Gate number 5 carries the medicine of wisdom. By keeping our stories of our ancestors alive, we pass on their wisdom. And this is an activity that helps to restore our souls. So as you can see, each gate carries its own potency that helps us to navigate through our losses. When we allow the energetic balm of sacred medicine to soothe our souls, we become better equipped to manage our losses, to metabolize our grief. Gate number 5 is where much of my grief resides. I grieve the loss of an ancestral blessing, the psychic inheritance from my ancestors was meant to be a blessing, but instead, it is a layer of heaviness. Due to the circumstances of enslaved people, it is believed that many of them did not weep in the face of unimaginable pain. The stoic facade and behaviors of these generations left behind a legacy of unattended pain. As a result, we are surrounded by the ghost of unwept ancestors. Among the multitude of sorrows that touch my soul are the following in regards to my ancestors. I grieve the fact that my ancestors were worked to death. I grieve the lies that were told about my ancestors and that it was said that they were incapable of feeling grief. I grieve the various experiments done on my ancestors that were humiliating and painful and were done with little or no mercy. I grieve the fact that so many white people could not feel empathy for Black people, a state of being known as cognitive dissonance. Now hang in there with me, please. There is hope. I acknowledge Reverend John Newton, the author of the song Amazing Grace, who was once a slave trader. It is said that he saw the light, reformed his ways, and became an outspoken abolitionist. The lyrics to Amazing Grace are based on Newton's experience of receiving God's grace and mercy, despite the terrible things he had done. Amazing Grace is one of my favorite hymns. A few months ago, the Undoing Oppressions Task Force at West Shore hosted an outing, and I attended along with about 15 other people. It was an African-American art exhibit that was held downtown at Cleveland City Hall. The art was exquisite, and most of us agreed that our favorite was a piece titled Amazing Grace. The artist, Gary Williams, happens to be a friend of mine, and he gave us permission to show his painting this morning. And Gary is here today, and he will join us in the sermon chat afterwards. so that he can talk to you about his painting. And now I will invite Acacia to sing Amazing Grace.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. 'Tis grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fear relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. Through many dangerous toils and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace that has brought me safe this far, and grace will lead me home. Grace will lead me home. Grace will lead me home.
History has shown us that courage can be contagious and hope can take on a life of its own. When we survive something that is incredibly hard, it not only makes us stronger, but it makes us more alive, more purpose-driven, more aware, more connected, and more human. We change our lives for the better when we bring loss out of the shadows. I have learned that it helps to call in for support when we are holding grief bigger than ourselves. What I do is I call on the ancestors. I have an altar in my home with photos of my immediate ancestors and some of my soul lineage ancestors. Ancestors from my soul lineage are people whom I've never met, but they are people like Maya Angelou, James Baldwin, Toni Morrison, Martin Luther King Jr., Aretha Franklin, Malcolm X, and other vocalists, poets, writers, and freedom fighters. I give thanks for all that my ancestors have done to help me be who I am today. If I am stuck, confused, or afraid, I ask them questions like, how would you have me look at this? What would you have me do? What would you have me say? And to whom? In other words, I'm asking them, who has my back? And then I listen. In times of loss and sorrow, do you have a practice that helps you to see better, feel better, know better, and do better? I hope so. Having an awareness of how grief shows up in our lives so that we can utilize that sorrow to help us. But how can it help? How can we utilize grief to help? It helps us to find meaningful ways to speak of sorrow so that we can enter the healing grounds. Metabolized grief can be a solvent. It can shape and reorganize us by softening and loosening the deepest currents of our psyches that allows us to become a little less rigid. Unmetabolized grief is numbing. When our grief cannot be spoken, it falls into the shadows and re-arises in us as symptoms such as anxiety, depression, and loneliness. Grief is a lifelong work. We come into right relationship with grief by coming into balance. We come into balance by having a practice. Silence and solitude are practices. Music is a practice that soothes my weary soul, whether it is secular or spiritual or a good old-fashioned gospel hymn. Compassion is a practice that keeps us connected with others, and self-compassion keeps us connected with ourselves. We build a practice of self-compassion by cultivating our relationship with ourselves and developing communion and relationship with the wider world. Practices help us to return to a familiar routine that grounds us in love. Rituals and spiritual practices offer a stabilizing force to help you return to a place of love. Soul-nurturing activities such as spending time with family and friends, engaging in community activities, embracing beauty and nature, all will help you find your way back home and remember who you really are. Great loss is destabilizing and it is exhausting. Time is a good friend, if we but realize it, because there are some things we simply cannot push through. The weary body and the fatigued mind will stabilize themselves if we can refrain from beating ourselves up until we begin to feel more alive. This is the movement of love, and every moment of healing helps. Francis Weller says, "Grief is a powerful solvent, capable of softening the hardest of places in our hearts. When we can truly weep for ourselves, we have invited the first soothing waters of healing to wash through our souls. Grieving, by its very nature, confirms worth. I am worth crying over. My losses matter." It is through the rites of grief that we are ripened as human beings. Grief invites gravity and depth into our world. We possess the capacity to metabolize sorrow into something medicinal for our soul and the soul of the community. The skill of grieving well enables us to become current, to live in the present moment, and be available to the electricity of life. The more we normalize the fact that we all have these experiences, the more we will be able to create a soft landing, not only for our own grief, but for everyone else's too. And so it is.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry with us until we meet again.
Please join us afterwards for the sermon chat at 12 noon in the chapel, I believe. And now for our benediction. What if our grief, given as a sacred offering, is a blessing, not a curse? What if our grief, not hidden away in corners, becomes a kind of communion where we shine? What if our grief becomes a liberation song that returns us to our innocence? What if our fierce hearts could simply bear witness? Go forth and bear witness.